The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3Advance, developers of sports tech apps that are AI-powered and UX-focused. So if you're looking to create some apps for your startup or your sports biz calls for some artificial or business intelligence, you should check out 3Advance. They're incredible. Go to 3advance.com. That's the number 3advance.com.
Empire.
Can tech in sports help solve bigger problems?
You know, to be able to have interactions and negotiate with a number of foreign ministers and others was a very exciting thing while it was happening, but it also gave me a greater understanding of what makes all of us tick and what's important to people across the board.
That's Jim Moore, founder of the Washington Institute for Business, Government, and Society, who believes future success in sports can evolve into future partnerships in many sectors. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. What can we learn from new infrastructure, connectivity, and engagement? Jim Moore's background is in trade agreements for the United States government, and his role in oversight of U.S. commercial operations in American embassies is shaping his new vision. You'll hear more about these ambitious endeavors. And also we'll have a visit with Wayne Kimmel, the managing partner of 76 Capital, who's focused stateside on emerging growth sectors like gambling and esports. But first, the future is not now for this take on replay, which has pros and often a lot of cons. Bad calls, they have been, and even with all the technology, always will be part of the game. Every game, which does beg a question. Can we live with bad calls if we stop trying to find new advances to prevent them? Shane Ryan from Golf Digest joins us now, and your argument, Shane, is bad calls are better than bad technology. And I want to start this conversation by saying you're actually preaching to the choir here.
Good to know. Yeah. You know, it's just one of those things that it kind of all hit me at once over the course of 1 week earlier this month, or actually in December, that it's not improving the situation. The technology is making things worse. It's really not preventing bad calls in the first place. It's slowing things down, and I think leading to more and more frustration. So that was really kind of the foundation of my argument.
I think some of it, though, to be fair, some of it does work. Like the Hawkeye for the tennis line calls, it's fast, it's efficient, the players don't claim it's wrong, the crowd seems to like it. So some of this stuff does work. But then even in your sport, like the flap with Patrick Reed a couple of weeks back, I mean, the call wasn't wrong, right? But and yet all it did was cause a whole bunch of mayhem.
Yeah, no, you make a terrific point about tennis. It's one I hadn't thought about. What's kind of funny with me about tennis is that it's not actually video review. So by the letter of the law, I can kind of put it in its own category. But no, you're right. The technology really is good there. But yeah, look at golf as a great example. You mentioned the Patrick Reed thing. He was caught red-handed. What he did was wrong. But there's also the fact that he was on TV, and so we look back at the 2013 Masters. Tiger Woods was penalized because a viewer called in. So we're looking at a weird situation where the players who are on TV the most now have the best chance of being caught, whereas a lower profile player sort of has more leeway to do something like Patrick Reed did because the chances that a camera is on him are much less. And so what Patrick Reed did was wrong, and there was justice in the ruling, but there's not a broader overall justice in how this is meted out in golf, for example, and who is most subject to it.
And then, listen, I read your piece, and obviously you're a big football fan, too. And here we are with the NFL playoffs, and the college football season is coming down to an end. And there was a crazy call in the college football playoff semifinals. And football seems to not be able to implement technology in a way that's efficient or equitable in any way to this point.
Yeah, and the call you're talking about that I wrote about was the Clemson-Ohio State game. There was an interception there was a fumble by Clemson after a pass that was recovered by Ohio State and returned for a touchdown. Would have been a really big moment. It wouldn't have definitely turned the game around, but I'm sure Ohio State would love to go back and see if it had. But the point on that is that all this technology we have, the fact that we have, a million camera angles in a game like that looking at something, it has not enhanced our understanding of the rules. And in fact, it's made it more complicated of what is a catch, for example. That's the one that seems to come up the most. And I watched this play live. On the field, it was ruled a fumble and a touchdown, and you're supposed to need overwhelming evidence to overturn something. And I watched it a million times just like everybody else. I don't see how it wasn't a catch. The announcers couldn't explain it. The referees after really didn't explain it to any satisfaction. And so we look at this and say, okay, we can see more now than we ever have before, but is it really helping us or is it making things more complicated? In a situation like that, I think it really makes things worse, and it kind of leads to this sort of alienation from the game almost and confusion because we don't know what we're looking at, and it's almost like we can't trust what we're seeing. And so that's the sort of what we're reaping from all this technology, and I just don't think it's helping most sports.
And I agree with you in most cases that it's actually altered the game in a way where it's made it more confusing or altered the rules in a way that don't make logical sense and slows games down, which in this era is the wrong thing to do in content consumption. So I'm with you on all that, but how do we roll it back? I mean, the genie's out of the bottle. These things are being used, they're being implemented, and they're being tested, and then there they are being used in real time. I don't know how you roll it back.
No, that's a terrific question, and not to get too deep, but you could ask that question about technology in our broader society. We're starting to realize that maybe all this digitization of modern life and the internet and devices, it's maybe not the best thing for us, but the ultimate question goes back to just what you asked, is how do we undo it? And it's really, really hard. So I don't have the answer to that. I mean, in sports, you could argue it's simpler, just get rid of it, but there's a lot easier for me to say that, and financially there's a lot more at stake than we could get into on one phone call. So you're right that it's a complicated situation. I think the first step is recognizing that it's not helping things, it's making things worse. And I think once there's a broad consensus around that, which I do think is growing, then maybe there'll be the popular energy to actually do something about it. What that would look like, I think, is something that, we still have to discover.
Yeah, I guess, the bottom line, and I've argued this here with some people outside of some of this technology when it comes to training and recovery and all these type of things that have bettered the modern athlete and bettered the team and made things better for, athletes in general. I think that's all positive. What we're talking about here is there any value to human error? And it appears that there is. The games were simpler even with bad calls that were made by humans.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I mean, we could talk about the value of human error, but for me, it's really the contrast between, what is the lesser of two evils in some ways. I'm not somebody who's going to romanticize, a home plate umpire, for instance, who can't call a ball or a strike and ruins a game because he gives a huge advantage to the pitcher. That's not something I love. But, again, it goes back to between this thing of the foibles of human judgment and how difficult it can be sometimes to call these things in real time, versus this technology, which I really do think is diminishing our enjoyment of the game and sort of alienating us from the human aspect of the sport, which is the worst thing. And that's the question I try to ask myself. And for me, it's hard to reach any conclusion, but the fact that the human error is really preferable to the onslaught of technology.
Shane Ryan writes for Golf Digest, and if you're like me, and apparently like him, we'd like to see some of this stuff taken out of the game. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you very much.
Up next, Jim Moore on how sports tech can be a bridge to cultural understanding. This is the Future Sport Podcast. Our guest this week is Jim Moore. He's the founder of the newly launched Washington Institute for Business, Government, and Society, and they're going to be launching their first major sports tech conference in Washington, D.C., the Global Sports Conference, coming up in June 2020. Thanks for being here, Jim.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
What is the goal of the Global Sports Conference?
Well, the Institute itself is very much involved in really addressing the intersection of business, government, and society. And everything we do really is related to producing results. And so this Global Sports Conference for us is really intended to be able to really focus on the world of sports. It's the one area where everybody can come together, so long as the rules are fair, we understand what the game is all about, and so it's very exciting, I think, to be able to look at sports from a different prism. It was Howard Cosell, the sports commentator of years ago, who once said that human activity is essentially, or sports is a microcosm of human activity, and I think that's absolutely true. And so I think this is going to be a very different kind of sports conference than we've seen, and hopefully will be very productive.
How will it be different?
Well, it's going to be different. First of all, we're going to be focusing on three areas. We'll be focusing on technology and security, on corporate responsibility, our social responsibility, and then also infrastructure. And we're going to make sure that we get heavily involved in analytics. We want over time, and mind, this will be the first of in a series of sports conferences that will be held every 2 years, that will allow us to really figure out how well we're doing in the area of ethics. To what extent, for example, is facial recognition increasing in popularity relative to taking care of security in stadiums and elsewhere? What exactly is happening with esports in consideration of how traditional sports have been conducted over time? So we're really going to be trying to monitor how the world of sports is changing over time, and we're going to be having, I think, a terrific group of speakers. The attendees are effectively going to be the owners of sports teams, CEOs and other executives from sports manufacturing companies and apparel and equipment. We're going to have sports ministers from around the world, and so I think there's generally genuine traction that's being created, and we're really looking forward to putting together a group of about 400 people who will participate in the conference.
Let's talk about security for a moment. 5G is coming. So where does that kind of fall into the purview of how to keep information safe?
Well, that's a real good question. We're very much involved in the tech industry here at the Institute generally. And so, getting into how technology is either enhancing or in some ways inhibiting or even hurting sports is something that we are going to certainly be concentrating on. And so we will be bringing together some of the world's great experts in the area of security to be able to answer some of those questions in a thoughtful, meaningful way.
As for esports, I don't know. Are you surprised by the rise of esports? Where are you on what has happened here? Because it's seemingly beyond a phenomenon now.
You're absolutely right. I think everybody is surprised by esports, even those people who invested in esports at the very beginning. If you look at the financial trajectories of where esports is going, there is no question that it is going to be with us for a long time to come. And for anybody who is invested in it at this early stage, is certainly going to see some significant returns in the process. But I think there is concerns as to how it's going to develop over time. What kind of a mystique is it going to play, particularly on younger viewers?
Yeah.
There are a lot of things about esports that we don't know about, and we're certainly going to be exploring it in the sports conference.
Including what? Connectivity from young people, the ability to connect with one another? Yeah.
That's right. And also, we for a long time have been concerned about our youth when it comes to their spending too much time perhaps on the Internet, being transfixed in not having really human connections outside of looking at a computer screen. And so, I think those kinds of things really need to be explored so that we know how to be able to deal with it into the future. And
in terms of infrastructure, are you talking about new stadiums? Is that where you're going with that?
Oh, yes, but, there's so much more that's going on in the infrastructure. First of all, we're going to be holding this conference just 5 weeks before the Tokyo Olympics. So often, particularly in public-private partnerships and trying to make sure that these major world events are a success, that sometimes there's not really the thoughtfulness that should have gone into producing infrastructure. For example, there was a huge stadium that was built in Manaus, Brazil, for the World Cup, and today it's turned into a weed factory.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing happening, I think, is really regrettable in this day and age. But there are some incredible things that are happening in the area. Qatar, for example, is in the process of building and putting into play 8 stadiums. Well, when the World Cup is over for that small country, 3 of those stadiums are going to be disassembled. One stadium is going to be sent to a yet unidentified sub-Saharan African country and rebuilt as a stadium to be able to allow spectators to be able to enjoy that stadium, a country that could ill afford building it on its own. There are going to be 2 other stadiums that will also be sent to sub-Saharan Africa, but rather than being rebuilt as stadiums, they're going to be turned into classrooms, hospitals, all sorts of things that in this day and age you literally can take what had been a stadium and turn it into other kinds of structures. And so I think that is a remarkable thing. And we're certainly, again, going to be exploring that.
I mean, that is interesting. There have been a lot of examples of the white elephants that have come through, specifically in Brazil, likely in Russia for the Olympic Games that took place there. Are you seeing a different way that governments and Olympic committees in different jurisdictions are looking at this to try to find some level of sustainability for all the infrastructure that comes with bringing an event like that to their community?
Absolutely. I think for countries that have put on these major events, it becomes very embarrassing if they've not been able to utilize those structures for their people later on. I mean, quite honestly, when you build massive infrastructure and you're putting in a great deal of money, both government as well as the private sector, and you're not utilizing it to the fullest extent after the curtain comes down, after these sports events are over, you're not doing your people much good. And so I think an awful lot of citizens, and we've seen this in Brazil, have shown that they're upset over wasteful construction, obviously corruption in certain instances when infrastructure is being built and improperly financed. And so there are a lot of those kinds of things, those kinds of questions that need to be asked and certainly need to be addressed in some form.
I haven't gotten to your background yet, which I think is interesting for the purpose of this conversation, which includes a number of roles in government and stints as the U.S. Assistant Secretary in the Commerce Department. Can you talk about that background and how it's helped shape the direction you want to go with this group and the event per se?
You bet. I'm thrilled to have had a career that really started in government, where I worked on Capitol Hill, but also was very much involved in negotiating a number of agreements that today are being seriously discussed. Everything from having been the chief negotiator for what turned out to be the last trade and economic agreement with the Soviet Union, to being involved in the launching of the Uruguay round, which created the World Trade Organization. I was even present at the creation in NAFTA. And so, to be able to have interactions and negotiate with a number of foreign ministers and others was a very exciting thing while it was happening, but it also gave me a greater understanding of what makes all of us tick and what's important to people across the board. And so to be able to really turn to sports here at the Institute as one of our projects in our portfolio, to be able to somehow put our arms around something that we all can understand, we can get used to, and we can engage in, I think is a very positive thing. Sports really can bring people together rather than split them apart.
And we are heading into an incredible year with the Olympics and the election. What a year 2020 is going to be.
You bet. Absolutely.
Yeah. Jim Moore is the founder of the Washington Institute for Business, Government, and Society, and their global sports conference is going to take place in summer 2020 in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you, Bram.
Up next, Wayne Kimmel, Managing Director at 76 Capital, on the investment and growth potential of esports and gambling in the U.S. This is the Future Sport Podcast. So let's take a minute here to thank our friends at 3Advance. These guys are ranked one of the nation's top app developers, but that's not all. They've helped grow a bunch of sports tech startups like Team Builder, T-Box Tour, and In-Game Fantasy. but they're also experts in user experience, cloud APIs, and artificial intelligence. So if you're looking for a dev partner to bring your future sport tech to life, look these guys up. Go to 3advance.com. They're the team to make it happen. At Advance, you will. That's the number 3advance.com, and tell them Future Sport sent you. Our guest this week is Wade Kimmel, who's the managing partner of 76 Capital, which is a venture capital company in the sports tech space, as well as an emerging partner for talent representation. Hey, Wayne, how are you?
I'm doing great, Bram. Thanks for having me.
In the description of the company, you mentioned that you invest in smart and nice entrepreneurs. And I got to be honest, I've never heard a VC firm actually mention being nice as a qualification before.
Well, at 76 Capital, we're all about making sure that we work with the right kinds of people. And you know, as a startup venture capitalist, especially in the sports space, these companies, you know, they don't just go public within 24 hours, within even 24 months. And you have to spend a lot of time and work with the entrepreneurs. And we want to make sure that we find the right kinds of people that want to do really big and exciting things. And they want to make sure the right kinds of people that we want to spend time with, because we're going to be spending a lot of time with them and helping them really build their companies.
And as for their companies, what are you looking for? What interests you?
Well, here at 76 Capital, we're all about companies in the sports tech industry, companies that are in the sports betting industry, and as well as the esports industry. You know, we really believe that there's opportunities to totally transform all three of those different industries within the sports world today.
Let's start with esports. Where has the growth been, and where do you see that space going?
Well, we're super excited in esports around the amateur side of the industry. You know, with 153 plus colleges and universities that are offering scholarships today, where do young people go to really show off their skills in the esports industry? And we believe there's an opportunity to build the amateur infrastructure and be part of the growth of that, because you think about every other sport out there. There's Little League, you move into Babe Ruth, you then move into your high school league, you have the AAU or a Perfect Game. That sort of roadmap is not there yet in the esports space. And so we're invested in a company called Nerd Street Gamers that's opening these local host arenas all across the country. And we believe that we want to be part of the overall growth of that amateur side of the industry. So we're excited about that side of the industry. We're excited about brands coming into the industry. We're excited about some of the partners that we have at Nerd Street, having Comcast as a partner, having now Five Below. And we're going to now be building out over 70 esports facilities in Five Below retail stores. Five Below is a retailer that has 900 stores across the U.S. And inside of their stores, we're putting esports facilities. And because, the consumer, the person that goes into those stores are the kids. And what do kids do? As my mom says, they game.
Yeah.
That's what they're all about.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Five Below, I have kids. So Five Below is a store where everything is literally $5 or below. So it is an inexpensive shopping experience. What does that look like? What is multiple seats? Is it almost like in a small arena inside the store? What does that look like?
Well, it's going to look like it's going to be, we're actually doing some really cool designs right now. But basically, there will be the regular store, and then right next door, in about 2,000 square feet, there will be high-end computers, high-speed internet, consoles, and places for people to come in and play. You'll be able to have there'll be everything from training inside of the stores. If you're interested in that, there'll also be leagues and tournaments that will occur in the stores as well.
You had mentioned the pipeline to potential scholarships. Are you looking at becoming or is the group you're working with looking at becoming like a recruiting service?
Well, we want to be, in a sense, we want to be able to allow esports players to showcase their skills. you just can't play in your mom and dad's basement or your bedroom and just then be able to perform on a stage with people yelling and screaming and cheering. It's very similar. Back in the day, I could make, maybe 9 or 10 out of 10 foul shots in a very quiet gym. But then when people are yelling and screaming, it's a whole different game. And it's a similar kind of a situation with esports. Esports, a lot of people train and play by themselves. But if you're playing, you got to be able to play on a stage with fans. And we think that that's what we're being able to build out right now, where there's actually an opportunity to really play in front of other people and have that kind of experience that you have with traditional sports in gyms and in stadiums and on fields with fans. We think it's really important to do that, especially because of what's happening from a collegiate perspective, where you have the opportunity to get scholarships. And once you go to play on one of these college teams, you're going to be playing on a stage, and the teams want that people to see if they can handle it.
And so you all will become something like an AAU of esports?
Well, whether it's becoming that organization or we're literally creating that kinds of tournaments. So with Nerd Street Gamers, they have something called the National Championship Series, where we're, this year in 2019, we are going to be crowning champions in 10 different games at 3 different levels across this National Championship Series. We're going to be even expanding that even more in 2020. We're excited about that. So we're creating tournaments, working with brands in that situation as well. So groups like Mike and Ike's will be one of the big sponsors with us in the tournaments that we do from the national championships perspective. So it could be, in the future, could look more like an AAU, or it could be just a whole new way of featuring talent and sharing, all the great players that are out there that want to become, college players and hopefully potentially even professional players in the future.
Let's get into gambling here a little bit. It still feels very Wild West with who's legalized it, who has not legalized it, all the different rules of the different jurisdictions. So what are you looking at currently? And then we'll expand upon maybe what you're looking at 5-10 years down the road when this is more commonplace and unified around the country.
Well, we're super excited about what's happening with the sports betting industry. I mean, the way that now right before Thanksgiving of 2019, we have 13 states that have live sports betting. We have 6 states that have laws that have been passed, and they're not live yet. We have 2 other areas like D.C. and Puerto Rico that have passed laws, and that could also go live soon. It's a super exciting time. We see opportunities in being able to collect data on the courts and on the fields and use that data from a data analytics perspective to create new and exciting fan experiences and betting opportunities. We see things right now from a media perspective, creating new kinds of media in and around sports betting. You see the traditional networks now talking about lines like they've never talked about that before. You have specific stations and networks like VSiN, which we're an investor in, which was started by Brent Musburger, where we're talking the numbers behind the games all the time, and really creating what we like to call the CNBC of sports betting. That's something that it's really exciting to see how that's playing out today. You've got the opportunity to also make sure that the games are being played and there's true integrity on the fields. So we've also helped create a company called U.S. Integrity, which we're an investor in, and working with them, with leagues, with universities and colleges, as well as the major conferences, helping them figure out, making sure that there's a true trusted third-party source for all information that's happening in the betting world. So there's a lot of really exciting things happening in the industry now. We're excited about this from a consumer perspective, but also from a business-to-business perspective. There's incredible opportunities, and we believe that the entrepreneurial companies will either be acquired by some of the really big players in this industry or become one of the big players in this industry. So we're excited about the whole industry as a whole right now.
Yeah, VSiN got ahead of it and wisely did that. And now we'll see as they continue to expand what they end up with. I am curious from a broadcaster's perspective because I look at this and I'm following specifically all the new shows and networks like VSiN that were created. Do you believe that the interest in this type of media is exaggerated at all? What have you seen so far in terms of real, true interest in all of this type of content that's coming out here?
Well, I don't think it's exaggerated. I think it's been really interesting what's happened with the sports betting media landscape is that people are craving for this information. You know, they crave for this information. There's more people that have sort of come out from the shadows are now who have basically been only discussing their bets with their bookies or doing things offshore now are more comfortable talking with anybody about it. I noticed it actually at a cocktail party over the weekend. I was talking with someone I had no idea liked sports, and all he wanted to do was talk to me about how much he loves VSiN. I just hates getting out of his car because he listens to Sirius XM channel 204, our channel on Sirius XM for VSiN. He's like, I hate getting out of the car because it's my favorite channel in the world to listen to. And I had no idea this guy even likes sports, no less betting on sports. So I think it's not exaggerated. I think there's a lot. There's so much opportunity. You had an industry that was a small cottage industry in Nevada, and now as it's rolling out all over the country, it's becoming a multi-billion-dollar business, and we're really excited about the prospects here.
What other tech spaces are you guys interested in?
So we are really also interested in what's happening around traditional sports and how technology is being integrated into those sports. So as an example, tonight, it's November 25th, right? I mean, and we've got the Hall of Fame Classic going on in Kansas City tonight, where you have teams like Stanford and Oklahoma and Butler are playing college basketball tonight, and they're going to be using our shot tracker basketball. So there'll be a sensor in the ball, there'll be a sensor in the jerseys of the players, and sensors are in the arena in Kansas City. And we will be tracking over 110 movements a second that each player makes. That data gets analyzed and that data gets crunched and real time, and will show up on the iPads that the coaches will have on the benches, as well as that information will be sent to the broadcasters. So the broadcasters will have new, interesting data on what's happening out there. You'll know what best five to match up with the other five that's out there on the court, and the assistants and the coaches on the bench will have this data on their iPad like never before. It's really exciting to see how this is playing out. In the future, this tech could very easily be translated into and also this data being sent to the bookmakers to make even more interesting real-time bets for gamblers in the future. So we're excited about this. We're excited about what's happening in that world. And then also from a sports tech perspective, we also have a really exciting baseball technology company called Diamond Kinetics, which is working throughout from little leagues, from the very, very, young amateur baseball players all the way up through AAA baseball, where we were able to, track everything by having a sensor in the bat as well as a sensor in a ball to be able to track, how the velocity, the spin rate, the speed of the swing, the exit velocity, all the things that you want to know on the baseball field, using that technology and having it just integrated into the game, not really making a big deal out of it, and not having, is something that we're able to do. And it's exciting to see how technology and the physical sports are really coming together and merging today.
Yeah, it is wild. Wayne Kimmel is the managing partner of 76 Capital. Thanks for joining us, Wayne.
Bram, thanks so much.
That will do it for us this week. As always, the future is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3Advance, developers of sports tech apps that are AI-powered and UX-focused. So if you're looking to create some apps for your startup or your sports biz calls for some artificial or business intelligence, you should check out 3Advance. They're incredible. Go to 3advance.com. That's the number 3advance.com.